My fiancé whispered. I still text my ex before bed. I just nodded, then sent her screenshots to his wife. The fireworks started at midnight. I never thought betrayal would arrive so quietly. It didn't come in an argument, or in the heat of suspicion, or with evidence I had to chase. It slipped into my ear one night, just as we were lying in bed, the kind of time where you expect warmth and honesty, not something that cracks the foundation of your life. Marissa leaned close, her breath warm against my shoulder, and whispered something that felt rehearsed. She said she still talked to her ex before she went to sleep. Not every night, she claimed, just sometimes, like a ritual. I don't know if she thought it would make her sound casual or even harmless, but the words twisted into me like a blade. I didn't flinch. That was the strangest part. I just nodded, like it was a passing remark. She smiled faintly, almost relieved, as if my calm meant approval. Then she rolled away, pulling the blanket over her, drifting into sleep. Inside, though, I wasn't calm. It wasn't rage either, not the kind that makes you shout and demand answers. It was something heavier, colder, something that told me if I wanted to know the truth, if I wanted to protect myself, I had to be quiet. Loud men lose everything. Quiet men gather what matters. I stared at the ceiling long after she began to breathe steadily beside me. I couldn't stop picturing her on her phone, thumbs flying across the screen, giggling at messages that weren't mine. And I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that she didn't even hide it anymore. She gave me that confession herself, which meant one of two things. Either she underestimated me completely, or she wanted to provoke something to justify her behavior. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed while making coffee, asked me about my schedule, kissed me on the cheek before she left for work. No sign of regret, no apology, no attempt to clarify. It was as if that whisper didn't exist, or as if she believed it had no weight. That gave me all the confirmation I needed. If she thought it was trivial, then she had been doing it long enough for it to feel normal. Which meant there had to be proof, threads of conversations, maybe photos, maybe worse. When she left, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the space her mug had left. I knew I had a decision to make. The average man would confront her, demand to see her phone, beg for honesty. But I didn't want honesty anymore. Honesty was already gone. I wanted evidence. Evidence gave me control. It wasn't easy. Marissa guarded her phone like it held her heart. She never left it behind, never set it down without face-down positioning. But she had one weakness, her nightly showers. She took them long and hot, with music loud enough to drown out the world. That evening, when the moment came, my pulse pounded like I was breaking into a bank vault. She set her phone on the dresser, screen still glowing. I slipped into the bedroom after she closed the bathroom door, picked it up, and waited for the fingerprint sensor to react. Nothing. She had added a passcode. I almost gave up right there, but something tugged at me. Marissa wasn't brilliant at hiding things. She was arrogant. She liked to make passwords sentimental, birthdays, anniversaries, small details she thought no one noticed. I tried the month and day of our engagement. Nothing. I tried the date we first moved in together. Still nothing. Then I remembered something she mentioned about her high school graduation being her first taste of freedom. I punched in that date. The screen unlocked. The relief was almost dizzying. But what I saw sobered me instantly. Her messages were flooded with a single name, Colton. I knew of him, of course. He was the chapter she never liked to discuss in detail, the man who came before me. The relationship that ended for the better, according to her. She had described him once as selfish, someone who wasn't ready to grow up. Yet here he was, still very present in her life, his name glowing on her screen like a ghost. I opened the thread. The first thing I noticed was the rhythm. Every night around the same time, she sent him a good night. Sometimes sweet, sometimes playful, sometimes laced with little hints that blurred the line between memory and desire. He often responded quickly, as if waiting. Their words were intimate, not just in a romantic sense, but in the way people talk when they know each other too well. She told him about her day, about our plans, even about me. He listened, joked, reminded her of old times. It was all there in black and white. The betrayal wasn't just in the secrecy, but in the intimacy. She had carried him into our bed every night without me knowing. But the deeper I scrolled, the more disturbing it became. She wasn't just chatting with an ex. She was feeding him details of our life, testing boundaries. She had written things like, "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never left you." He teased back, saying, "Maybe you wouldn't be texting me from another man's bed." She replied with laughing emojis, as if it were harmless, but the implication was clear. I didn't stop scrolling. I couldn't. And then I found something that shifted everything. References to Colton's wife. He wasn't single. He wasn't some free agent she could flirt with guiltlessly. He was married, to a woman named Hannah, who had recently given birth. I saw Marissa congratulating him, even cooing about the baby, while still sending him bedtime messages. The duplicity was staggering. They were both living double lives, maintaining their public roles while keeping this shadow connection alive. My hand shook as I captured screenshots, one after another. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I knew they were important. Each image was a piece of the puzzle, evidence that could not be denied. By the time she stepped out of the shower, steam billowing into the hall, I had locked her phone and placed it back exactly where she left it. She came into the room wrapped in a towel, humming. I smiled faintly, pretending to scroll through my own phone, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Over the next few days, I watched her more closely. The little things gave her away. The way she angled her phone, the small smile at night, the reflex to silence notifications when I walked in. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have dismissed it as paranoia. But the truth made those gestures undeniable. What surprised me most was how ordinary she acted otherwise. She still kissed me goodbye, still sent me miss you texts during the day, still talked about the wedding we were planning. It was almost insulting, this performance of loyalty while betraying me with such consistency. And yet, the more she performed, the calmer I felt. Because now, the power was shifting. She thought she was the puppeteer, pulling strings while I danced unknowingly. But I had cut the strings. She just didn't realize it yet. I spent nights planning, not in anger, but in strategy. The question wasn't whether to confront her, it was when and how. She had given me a confession without realizing it, and I had gathered the evidence she never wanted me to see. Now the game wasn't about my heartbreak. It was about control. One night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I scrolled through the folder of screenshots I had stored in the cloud. Each image was a weapon waiting to be used. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about me and her anymore. Hannah deserved to know. She was at home with a newborn, living in ignorance, while her husband played late-night games with his ex. That was the moment my revenge began to crystallize. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to use their own words, their own arrogance, and let the truth collapse everything they had built. Marissa shifted in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't make out. I stared at her, wondering if she had any idea how close she was to losing everything. Probably not. Betrayers rarely think the other person has the strength to act. But I did. And in that silence, staring at the ceiling once again, I promised myself I wouldn't waste the gift she had given me. The quiet whisper that started it all. When you have evidence in your hands, it changes the way you see everything. Suddenly, the smallest interactions become loaded. A smile at the dinner table isn't innocent anymore. A quick glance at a phone isn't harmless. Everything feels like part of a performance, staged for your benefit, while the truth waits backstage. That's how the following week felt with Marissa. She kept up her routine, laughing too brightly at my jokes, talking about wedding invitations as if we were on the same team. If I hadn't already seen the messages, I might have believed it. But now I recognize the cracks in her act. The thing about carrying knowledge like this is that it doesn't let you rest. It buzzes in your head constantly, demanding action. I knew sitting on the screenshots forever wasn't an option. They weren't just proof of betrayal, they were leverage. But leverage only matters when you use it. The first decision I made was to involve Hannah. Not because I wanted to blow everything up immediately, but because she deserved the truth. She had a newborn. Her world was supposed to revolve around stability, not lies. The thought of her rocking her baby to sleep while Colton texted my fiancé made my stomach turn. But dropping the screenshots into her lap out of nowhere would be reckless. I needed to be deliberate. If I was going to set off this chain reaction, it had to be done in a way that couldn't be twisted against me. I spent nights compiling the messages into a clean file. I didn't just screenshot randomly. I organized everything by date, highlighting the late-night exchanges, circling the lines where Marissa crossed boundaries. I left out anything that could be brushed off as innocent. The focus was sharp: emotional intimacy, bedtime rituals, and subtle admissions that crossed the line from friendly to something else. When I finished, I stared at the file like it was a live grenade. Sending it would end the life I had with Marissa. There'd be no walking back. But the alternative, pretending none of this was happening, felt worse. The night I decided to send it, Marissa was already in bed scrolling through her phone. I sat in the living room with my laptop, staring at Hannah's contact information. My hand hovered over the trackpad. For a second, I almost closed everything and walked away. But then I thought about that whisper, the smugness behind it, the way she rolled over afterward as if nothing had changed. That was all the push I needed. I sent the file. I expected silence at first, maybe a delay, but the response came quickly. My phone lit up with a new message, and when I opened it, there it was, Hannah's reply. She didn't waste words. She thanked me for showing her, said she had suspected something but never had proof. Then came the anger, raw and unfiltered. She asked how long it had been going on, if I knew about anything physical. I told her I didn't know beyond the texts, but the pattern spoke for itself. That should have been enough for the night. But it didn't stop there. Hannah wasn't the kind of person to keep quiet. She said she couldn't hold it in, not when her whole life had been built around someone who was lying to her. She needed answers, and she needed them now. I put my phone face down on the table, trying to steady myself. I thought maybe she'd confront him quietly, maybe the fallout would take days to ripple outward. Instead, within the hour, my fiancée's phone buzzed nonstop. She was in the bedroom, her voice rising with each call, her tone shifting from confusion to panic. I didn't go in. I sat where I was, listening to the storm build. Eventually she came rushing out, barefoot, clutching her phone like it was burning her hand. She looked at me with wide eyes, demanding to know if I had said something, if I was behind this. I didn't answer. My silence told her more than words could. She screamed that I had ruined her life, that I had no right. But the thing is, betrayal doesn't come with rights. Once she whispered that confession into my ear, once she left those messages glowing on her phone, she gave me the weapon. All I did was choose to use it. The rest of the night was chaos. I could hear her on the phone with Colton, their voices sharp and frantic. He denied everything at first, but then she shouted his wife's name, and the volume dropped to whispers. That silence told me denial was useless. At some point, she locked herself in the bathroom, crying, while I sat in the kitchen with the lights off. I wasn't enjoying any of it. I wasn't celebrating. I was just waiting to see how far the damage would spread once the truth was out. Because truth doesn't stop once you release it. It keeps traveling, finding new people to cut. The next morning, the consequences began to show. Marissa's mother called, her voice tight and suspicious. She asked what was going on, why she had heard rumors about messages with an ex. Marissa tried to deflect, but I could hear the panic in her voice. She was cornered. Later, while she was out running errands, I got another message from Hannah. She said Colton had confessed, at least partially. He admitted to keeping in contact, said it was harmless, but Hannah wasn't buying it. She had seen the way he responded instantly, the way he prioritized Marissa even late at night. She told me she was done being the naive one. She was considering calling his family, maybe even her own parents, to make sure no one overlooked the truth. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just my revenge anymore. It had evolved into something larger, something beyond my control. By giving Hannah the evidence, I had started a fire that would burn through both of their lives. And the flames were spreading faster than I expected. Marissa came home that evening looking drained, her eyes red from crying. She tried to act like things were under control, but the cracks were obvious. She avoided me, pacing the living room, making calls she thought I couldn't hear. But I heard enough. Colton was in damage control mode, begging her to keep it quiet until things cooled down. Marissa begged him back, saying she couldn't lose everything. I almost laughed at that, because what she feared losing had already slipped through her hands. The following days were a blur of tension. Every hour brought a new ripple. I heard her slam the phone after arguing with her best friend. She deleted social media apps, then reinstalled them, then deleted them again. She jumped when her phone buzzed, like every message was a landmine. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I went to work, came home, acted as if nothing had changed. That silence drove her mad. She wanted me to explode, to fight, to give her a reason to turn this back on me. But I never gave her that satisfaction. One night, she finally snapped. She stood in the middle of the living room, shaking, and asked me how I could be so calm while everything fell apart. I just looked at her and said nothing. She screamed that she hated me, that I was cold, that I wasn't human. But she was wrong. I was human. I was just done playing the fool. Later that night, when she finally collapsed on the couch from exhaustion, I sat alone in the dark. My phone buzzed again. It was Hannah. She told me she had shown the screenshots to Colton's sister and mother. She wanted them to know what kind of man he was. That was the moment I realized the fireworks had truly begun. Not just between Marissa and me, not just between Colton and Hannah, but across every person connected to them. Family, friends, reputations, they were all now pieces in the blast radius. And I was at the center, silent, holding the detonator that had already been pressed. The real impact of betrayal isn't in the act itself. It's in how far the consequences spread. One whisper in the dark had already reached across households, families, and reputations. And now I was watching everything I had known about my fiancé unravel in real time. By the third day after sending Hannah the screenshots, the silence in our apartment had become unbearable. Marissa barely spoke to me, except to curse under her breath or ask why I hadn't defended her. She had stopped pretending to be the cheerful fiancé. She was a cornered animal now, pacing, snarling at shadows, clinging to her phone like it was the last lifeline she had left. But the phone wasn't saving her anymore. It was betraying her in a different way. Every time it lit up, Another person had something to say about her secret. Family members, old friends, even co-workers were hearing whispers. Hannah had started quietly releasing pieces of the evidence into private circles. Screenshots here, a snippet there. Enough to make denial impossible, but not enough for Marissa to predict who knew what. It was brilliant in its own way, slow, suffocating, methodical. I hadn't asked Hannah to do it, but I respected how she understood the power of timing. One evening, I came home to find Marissa sitting in the dark, her face illuminated only by her phone screen. She looked up at me with red eyes and said that Colton was threatening to come over. She said he was blaming me, claiming I had set him up, that I had hacked into her phone. I didn't even need to respond. The lie was too desperate. Colton was unraveling just as quickly, trying to throw blame in every direction except where it belonged. I poured myself a drink and sat down across the room, letting her stew in her panic. The knock came a little after midnight. It wasn't tentative. It was sharp, angry. Marissa shot up, clutching her robe tight, whispering that she didn't want to face him. But she didn't move to stop me either when I walked to the door. Colton stood there, his face flushed, his breath sour with alcohol. He didn't greet me. He just pushed past, demanding to know what I had done. He accused me of ruining 2 relationships, of crossing a line by involving his wife. His words slurred together, but his anger was crystal clear. Marissa trailed behind him, wringing her hands, pleading with him to calm down. For a moment, I just stood there, studying him. This was the man she thought deserved nightly confessions. A man who couldn't even face his lies sober. I let him rant. Then, when he paused to catch his breath, I pulled out my phone. I played the recording I had taken the night she whispered to me in bed. Her own voice filled the room, soft but undeniable, confessing that she still talked to him every night. The room went still. Colton froze, his jaw slack. Marissa's face drained of color. "Tell me," I said evenly. "Was I supposed to ignore that too?" Neither of them answered. The silence was heavier than any shouting could have been. That was when another knock rattled the door. This one was different, firm, steady. I opened it to find Hannah standing there, holding her baby carrier with one arm. She didn't look unhinged or hysterical. She looked composed, determined. She stepped inside, set the carrier gently on the floor, and looked directly at her husband. "You've had enough time to lie," she said quietly. "Now you can listen." Colton tried to protest, but Hannah raised her phone. She had compiled more messages, this time with timestamps, showing how he had replied instantly to Marissa even on nights he had told her he was working late. The confrontation spiraled. Hannah's calm cut sharper than any shouting. She listed out the nights she had been alone with their newborn while he was texting my fiancé. She pointed to Marissa and asked her if she had enjoyed playing second wife in someone else's marriage. Marissa broke down sobbing, saying she never meant to ruin anything, that it was just emotional support. But the words sounded pathetic in the thick silence of the room. Colton buried his face in his hands, swearing under his breath. I leaned against the counter, watching the scene unfold like a spectator. I had no need to intervene anymore. The truth was self-sustaining. The baby stirred in the carrier, whimpering, and Hannah bent down to soothe her child with one hand while still glaring at her husband. That image struck me, the contrast between her quiet strength and their childish deceit. It made me realize I had chosen the right side when I sent her those screenshots. Eventually, Hannah gathered herself and said she was leaving. She told Colton she'd be contacting a lawyer, that she wanted custody, that she wouldn't allow their daughter to grow up watching him behave this way. Colton begged, tried to follow her, but she turned her back and walked out without hesitation. The door clicked shut, leaving the apartment in suffocating silence. Marissa slumped onto the couch, whispering that her life was over. Colton sat beside her, staring at the floor. That was when I spoke again, not with anger, but with clarity. I told them both that their choices had led to this, that the destruction wasn't my doing, it was theirs. I told Marissa the wedding was finished, that I would be contacting her parents in the morning. She cried harder, begging me to reconsider, but I had already made up my mind. The next day, the collapse spread like wildfire. Marissa's parents called me, furious, demanding to know what had happened. I forwarded them the same evidence Hannah had. Her father's silence on the line told me everything. He couldn't defend her. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Hannah had indeed filed for separation. She had shown the evidence to Colton's family, who turned on him instantly. His mother sent Marissa a message so venomous that she spent hours sobbing after reading it. I didn't comfort her. I didn't even sit near her. By the weekend, Colton had vanished from the picture, trying to hide out at a friend's house, while Hannah solidified her case. Marissa was left alone with me, but we weren't partners anymore. We were just 2 strangers sharing a space filled with accusations and silence. The most shocking moment came 2 nights later. Marissa confessed that she had thought Colton would leave his wife for her if the truth came out. She believed that once everything was exposed, he would finally choose her. Instead, he had begged Hannah not to leave and tried to pin the blame on me. That revelation was almost worse than the betrayal itself. Not only had she lied to me, she had built her entire future on a delusion. I watched her break down again, clutching her phone as if waiting for a message that would never come. She had gambled our relationship, her reputation, and her family's trust on a man who abandoned her the moment things got hard. And I realized then that the real punishment wasn't what I had done. It was what they had done to themselves. All I had done was open the curtains. Still, there was one final step I knew I had to take. I couldn't just drift away silently. There had to be closure, a clean severing of ties. So the next morning, I drafted a message to the wedding vendors. I explained that the wedding was off, that any inquiries should be directed to Marissa. I copied her on every message. Within hours, her phone was flooded with calls and emails from florists, caterers, photographers, all demanding explanations and payments. Her screams of frustration filled the apartment, but I ignored them. This was the price of duplicity. That night, I packed a bag. I told her I would be moving out, that she could stay until the lease ended, but she'd be handling everything alone. She tried to grab my arm, begged me to reconsider, said we could rebuild. But I had already seen what rebuilding with her would look like, a foundation of lies, patched over with empty promises. I wasn't interested. As I closed the door behind me, I felt no guilt, only a strange, steady calm. The collision had happened, and the pieces were still falling. Leaving the apartment didn't feel like running away. It felt like finally stepping out of a burning building. The walls had been smoldering for weeks, maybe months, and I'd been pretending not to notice the smoke. By the time I carried my bag down the stairwell, there was nothing left inside worth saving. I stayed at a friend's place for the first few nights, sleeping on a couch that creaked with every shift. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. My phone stayed by my side, buzzing endlessly. Messages from Marissa piled up. Long apologies, furious accusations, pleas for forgiveness, even threats to hurt herself if I didn't answer. I didn't respond to any of them. Silence was the only language that mattered now. While she spiraled, the real damage was happening elsewhere. Hannah moved with surgical precision. Within a week, Colton's infidelity wasn't just whispered in family circles, it was documented in legal paperwork. She filed for separation, requested custody, and attached the screenshots as supporting evidence. Her lawyer must have marveled at the neatness of it all. Dates, times, messages that painted an undeniable picture of neglect and betrayal. Colton tried to fight back, but his position was weak. He couldn't argue that he was a devoted husband when his own words, sent night after night, proved otherwise. The custody battle began shifting against him before it even started. Friends of his, people who once defended him, began to distance themselves. It's one thing to cheat. It's another to cheat while your wife is home caring for a newborn. That disgust sticks. Marissa wasn't spared either. Once her parents had the full picture, their disappointment turned cold and final. They called me, apologizing for her actions, but their words carried a sharp edge. Her father said he couldn't believe she would sabotage her own engagement for a man who had already moved on. Her mother admitted she couldn't defend her anymore. They stopped helping with wedding plans, canceled the financial support they had promised, and left her to deal with the vendors alone. That was when the second collapse began. The vendors didn't care about heartbreak. They cared about contracts and money. When I forwarded them Marissa's contact information, they wasted no time flooding her with invoices and cancellation fees. The apartment echoed with her shouts as she argued with them over the phone, insisting she wasn't responsible. But in their eyes, she was. I heard later through a mutual acquaintance that she tried to get her parents to cover the costs, but they refused. Her father told her bluntly that if she was grown enough to play games behind her fiancé's back, she was grown enough to deal with the consequences. That must have stung worse than anything I could have said. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. At work, I buried myself in projects. My coworkers noticed I looked tired, but I brushed it off. I didn't share the details. This wasn't a story I wanted to spread casually. It wasn't entertainment, it was scorched earth. But the story spread anyway. Stories like this always do. People talk, screenshots leak, whispers move faster than facts. Soon, Marissa's name was tangled with words like unfaithful and reckless. Friends she had counted on began to fade away. She wasn't invited to events, wasn't included in group chats. The social exile hit her harder than the financial mess. She had built her image on appearances, on being admired. Without that, she had nothing left to cling to. The last time I saw her was almost 2 months later. I had agreed to meet her in a coffee shop because she said she needed closure. I went, not out of hope, but out of curiosity. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. Her hair was unkempt. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around a paper cup. She started talking before I even sat down. She said she had made a mistake, that she hadn't realized what she was risking. She admitted Colton had dropped her almost immediately after Hannah left, that he had begged his wife to forgive him while cutting Marissa off entirely. Listening to her was like watching someone recount their own execution. She wanted me to say something kind, to acknowledge that I had loved her once, that maybe we could rebuild. But I couldn't give her that. I told her calmly that love without respect isn't love at all, and that there was nothing to rebuild. She cried quietly, then asked if I hated her. I said no. Hate requires energy. She had drained all of mine long ago. We parted without hugging, without shaking hands. She lingered at the table long after I walked out, staring at nothing. That was the last time I heard her voice. From what I learned later, she ended up moving back in with her parents temporarily, though the relationship with them was strained. She had to pick up extra shifts at her job to pay off the debts from the wedding vendors. And socially, she never recovered. People don't forget when betrayal becomes public spectacle. They keep it in the back of their minds, a permanent stain. Colton's downfall was harsher. Hannah went through with the separation. She gained primary custody, and he was allowed only supervised visits. His reputation in their community tanked. Friends avoided him, colleagues whispered behind his back. He moved into a small apartment alone, the kind of place that feels temporary but ends up permanent. Hannah, on the other hand, seemed to grow stronger. She sent me one last message, thanking me for giving her the truth. She said she was focusing on her daughter, building a future that wasn't weighed down by lies. She didn't mention Colton again, and I never asked. As for me, I found myself strangely at peace. I hadn't gone into this looking for destruction. I had only wanted clarity, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But once I had the evidence, once I acted, everything else followed like dominoes. Sometimes I wondered if I could have handled it differently. If I could have confronted Marissa quietly, given her a chance to confess fully. But then I remembered that whisper in the dark, the way she had said it like a child testing boundaries. She hadn't been seeking honesty. She had been gauging how blind I was willing to be. And I wasn't blind anymore. The consequences were brutal, yes. Families torn, reputations ruined, futures rewritten. But none of it was my fault. All I had done was shine a light on what was already happening. They destroyed themselves. I just refused to burn with them. Months later, I found myself sitting in a quiet bar one Friday night, nursing a drink. The chaos had faded into memory by then. Work was steady, life was calm, and the silence around me finally felt restful instead of suffocating. I scrolled through my phone absent-mindedly and saw a new message notification. It was from Hannah. Just 2 words, thank you. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting it down. That was all I needed. Not revenge, not vindication, not even closure. Just the knowledge that the truth had been set free and that someone had used it to build a better life. As for Marissa and Colton, their names became distant echoes, nothing more than reminders of what happens when arrogance meets reality. The fireworks had burned bright, yes, but when they faded, the only thing left was smoke and silence. And I walked away breathing easier.